go to the phone right now and bring in another guy who can tell us a little bit more about Mike Malone, and that's Greg Gerould. He does TV and radio for ESPN in Sacramento. Greg, welcome to the show.
Let me just make a quick change here, Les. It's Gary.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No
I'm
worries.
very, very sorry about that.
No worries.
I wrote it down poorly. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
Can't read my own writing.
He's a fool, Gary.
I'm going to wait and see if my name changes to Greg.
All right, I'm going to start this over. Let's go to the phone and bring in Gary Gerould, who does TV and radio for ESPN in Sacramento, to find out more about Mike Malone.
Thank you, Lee, for bringing Gary in.
Gary, what can you tell us about Mike Malone and his style of play? Because Woody is not confident that Mike Malone can do here what needs to be done, and that's run other teams out of the gym. Can Mike Malone do that?
No, I'm not sure that if he can do that or not. He's a guy that, at least when he came into Sacramento and his time here, I think he hung his hat on defense. I heard you talking about efficiency, which is kind of one of the keywords in this day's NBA.
Yeah.
And you hear a lot of talk about pace and tempo and that type of thing, but I believe defense is what Michael Malone hangs his hat on. And whether or not, it's pace, it's defense, it's efficiency, whatever, I'm a firm believer that you've got to get guys in the locker room to buy into whatever system you're trying to espouse. And one of the things that Michael Malone did effectively in Sacramento was get guys to buy in. And for the first time in 8 or 9 years since Rick Adelman was the head coach of the Sacramento Kings and enjoyed success, 8 consecutive years of getting into the playoffs, I think the people in the locker room for Sacramento bought in to what Mike Malone was selling. And that was a refreshing change. And it remains a giant mystery to many, including myself, as to how the powers that be in Sacramento either misread that situation and wasn't aware of to the extent or the significance of guys buying in the locker room that they went and called for a coaching change early last season, even though the Kings did get off to a very, very good start early on.
Gary, this is Woody, and I don't want to put you in a bad position, but you said you don't understand how the powers to be. Well, one of the powers to be is here with the Denver Nuggets again, and Pete, and the other is the owner. And we've seen owners that powers to be that really don't know what they're doing. They were car dealers, or they made their money on Wall Street, and once they get into baseball or football or basketball, they forget totally how they became successful and rich, other than if they inherited it. So I understand that, but when you say to me they bought in, help me out. I'm pretty stupid here. They didn't have a winning record when he was fired. I know that DeMarcus Cousins was hurt, and they got off to a 7-2 start, but that's a small sampling. Last year they had a horrible record. Tell me how it was proven that they bought into what he was doing, because they weren't very good.
Well, they bought in terms of defensive, busting their butts, working hard collectively as a team. And remember, yes, he was released very early in the season. They started 9-5. And of the first, I think, 10 or 11 games the Kings played last year, they were all against playoff clubs or playoff contending clubs from the previous season. That's what I'm talking about in terms of buying in. Then Cousins goes down with viral meningitis. Kings really struggled without the big fellow in the middle, and the record started to erode. It was during that time that the coaching change was made. Now, to what extent did Pete D'Alessandro figure in that particular decision? Pete said that it was basically his call. Were there communication problems between Malone and D'Alessandro in Sacramento? That certainly appeared to be the case. Now, as I understand it, D'Alessandro's new role in the Nuggets organization will be somewhat different than what his role was in Sacramento. Can those two, coincide? Does one have influence over another in terms of how long they're with the organization? I think it all comes down to the same old business it always has. You win, it covers up a whole lot of ugliness, and if you lose, it compounds the situation you're in. So, I hate to say it, Woody, but it's going to have to be a wait-and-see situation.
Well, but, Gary, you'll understand this. When you get to be my age, I don't have time to wait and see.
I hear you.
I don't even buy green bananas.
Our guest is Gary Gerould from ESPN in Sacramento. This segment brought to you by Papa John's. Better ingredients, better pizza, Papa John's. if you will, give me a couple of strengths of Mike Malone, and if you don't mind, give me a couple of weaknesses as well.
Well, I think from a strength standpoint, in terms of dealing with him, I found him to be very straightforward, very articulate, very honest in his assessment. He wasn't a guy that tried to spin or dodge or hide. He'd face questions head on, and I found that somewhat refreshing. I like that aspect of it a lot. I like the way he worked during the off season to, earn the trust, the rapport with his players and people in that locker room. I thought all of that was very, very good. Now, I don't know. I'm not much of an X's and O's guy in terms of basketball. I look at the product and I try to determine, is it entertaining, is it not entertaining? One of the things that the Kings really struggled with was protecting the basketball. They had, turnover numbers way, way too high. Michael Malone was the first guy to say that that's something that had to be changed, and they struggled in that respect. All in all, I was impressed with what he brought to the table in Sacramento, and maybe it was just a case of, after being through so many coaches after the success of Rick Adelman, I thought that finally this team was starting to build a legitimate foundation, trying to get things turned around. Then you have the problems in terms of the health of Cousins, and things stumble. Then they let Malone go, and from that point on, I think the players felt betrayed. I think they didn't understand what was happening, and it was a downward spiral.
Well, I was going to ask you sort of a two-parter here. Thank you for all that helping me. As I said, I'm not very smart. How's George Karl going to do there, given that there isn't much talent in B? Because he had as a point guard here, Ty Lawson, and the Kings have a real problem at point guard. Do you see any possibility that the Kings and the Nuggets might make a deal, and can George Karl succeed where Mike Malone didn't there?
I'm impressed with George Karl's track record. I'm impressed with the way he deals with situations. I think that I've found him already to be somewhat of an independent, free thinker. How much, latitude will the front office give him in that respect? Now, that being said, you bring in another factor. Vlade Divac is now basically in a role that Pete D'Alessandro was in Sacramento. Vlade's a big team guy. He believes in unity between front office, basketball operations. You all pull together, you all work hard, et cetera, et cetera. Does he have the experience that is needed in that success, to have success? I am not totally certain, but I, for one, really enjoy Vlade Divac. I also really enjoy George Karl. George's great track record, I think, speaks for itself. And I don't know, in terms of talent, you've got to tweak, you've got to strengthen, you've got to get better depth. Point guard situation is an interesting one. George Karl frequently talks about, what he liked about Ty Lawson. Darren Collison, who is the Kings' #1 point guard, was injured the entire time since George Karl came in. So George has yet to really see what Darren Collison can do alongside DeMarcus Cousins, Rudy Gay. But I think it's going to be an interesting offseason this year for Sacramento in trying to strengthen. And, it's a huge challenge when you've got a small market team trying to, bring marquee players through free agency. That doesn't work unless you're in Chicago, Miami, New York, Los Angeles. We've seen that, time and time again. So big challenges for Vlade Divac, big challenge for George Karl. But I think the couple of pieces that they have at Cousins, Gay, and I think that Darren Collison can be key as well. What the Kings are going to do in this upcoming draft here in the next couple of weeks, they need frontline help. They need support for Cousins in the big man department, and they also desperately need support in the backcourt at the point guard position. So those are the challenges that faces George Karl, Vlade Divac, Sacramento Kings.
Hey, Gary, really appreciate your time, and sorry I got your first name wrong at the beginning.
Hey, not a problem. That's happened multiple times in my life, and I've managed to survive thus far.
I didn't think, Gary, that it was that easy to get somebody's name confused when it's Gary. Nice job,
I wrote
Les.
it down wrong. Sorry. It could have been worse.
Well,
I could have called you Gerald.
I know.
Sorry.
Yeah, but see, he and I work together at ESPN. We actually know other people in the media and who they are. So.
Oh, man.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks,
Guys,
Gary.
thank you.
All right, we'll see you soon.
We
Gary
hope,
Gerould
we hope you'll come on again. We'll get it right.
with
next time.
ESPN in Sacramento. That segment was brought to you by Papa John's, the official sponsor of the Colorado Rockies. You know, the day after every Rockies win, you get 50% off your. Did you like that pause? I was thinking about what I should say there. You get 50% off your regular menu price online order at papajohns.com. Use the promo code ROXWIN.